Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 148, Divine Co-Creation. It also just happens to be the 6th anniversary of this podcast, which I can hardly believe. And this podcast remains a co-creation of the divine. I could have never come up with this by myself. So feel free to listen in, and I hope that you enjoy the episode.
You're listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I'm your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience here on lovely planet Earth. Make the most of it. This is Season 7, Heaven on Earth, and this is episode 148, Divine Co-Creation. And that's not all. We are also celebrating the 6th anniversary of this podcast. I can barely believe that it's been 6 years since publishing our very first episode in 2018, May 1st, but there you have it. And this episode is really rather inspired by that time, that moment, that several years leading up to the publishing of this podcast. And let's just go ahead and jump in. Are you ready? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journey. Let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. It's the 6th anniversary of Let's Get Meta. And though I've told it before, let me share again how this podcast came about. And I had no idea that I was going to still be publishing episodes 6 years in, honestly. I knew nothing about podcasts, except that I enjoyed listening to some of them. The first podcast I ever listened to was Mugglecast, and it is a Harry Potter podcast. I really enjoyed listening to that. I found it while I was in grad school in New York City, and it was great to listen to on the subway to and from class. And just easy. But I never thought that I would be producing my own podcast. And how that happened is a rather decent example of our topic today, which is divine co-creation, or co-creating with the divine, co-creating with Source, Spirit, God, higher power, co-creating with those more divine presence that is there within us and all around us all the time. But so often on this planet, we get distracted by material things, by mental things that we intellectualize and think about and believe that we know and understand, and then we want to plan in our own desires, our own beliefs, our own everything. And so quite often, at least in this country, I'll say in the United States, it feels as though so many things are in fact created or come about without any thought of the divine, without any thought of Source, higher power, supreme being, God, and even your own soul, your own immortal all-knowing soul. So many things come about, and it's more and more, perhaps more and more obvious now as we look around at all of our crumbling systems that there is an absence of the divine in many of those things. And perhaps the things that endure the most or indeed are the most beautiful and inspiring to gaze upon, those are the things that were co-created with the divine. And in no way am I putting my small podcast in that category, but I would not be here speaking with you now without having that coordination with the divine, that connection somehow, even though I didn't understand it, and maybe still don't on many levels. I have told this story before, but here we go again, just because it's the anniversary, and why not? And it's also the topic of this episode, so bear with me. But I started to get the guidance to do a podcast, to start this podcast, about 2 years before it actually happened. And what do I mean by the guidance? It, like anything else, we all receive guidance. It's just, do we recognize it? Are we aware of it as it's happening? And this was at a moment in my life where I was starting to recognize that I was being spoken with by the divine all the time, as I believe we all are. I don't think I'm unique. I know I'm not unique in that, but I feel like if we just listen, then we can start to understand, discern, and become aware of what the divine is trying to say to us and trying to help steer us towards for our best and highest goods. So in this case, in this story, it was kind of like little signs and signals. Sometimes when I would listen to a podcast, I'd get this voice in my head that was kind of like, you should do that. And it wasn't my voice and I know that because I didn't like the sound of my voice. I don't particularly like the sound of my voice even now, but I definitely didn't then. And I didn't know how. I didn't want to learn how. I didn't want to dive into the tech aspect of doing a podcast. I didn't have passions to be somebody whose voice was heard in any kind of particular way. It wasn't a desire of mine. And so I just wouldn't listen. And it would pop in every once in a while. And then over time, even the name of the podcast, what it was about, how I would begin by interviewing people, the list of people that I would interview came in. And it was based on where I was at in my life at that time. I was in my exploration phase of seeing all kinds of different metaphysical and spiritual people for just exploratory reasons. What is astrology? What is numerology? What's this kind of energy medicine? What's this kind of channeler? All of these things, right? So I had a running list in my head of people I'd love to interview and talk about things with, and the name dropped in one day, and it was very clear, and I just kept not listening. And one thing about co-creating with the divine is that it just seems to flow. I was not, as you can probably tell, putting effort into doing this because it wasn't something I was trying to do. No effort on my part. It just came together. All of the things just came together. And finally, when apparently I could push it away no longer, I was just at that point of sleep where you're like really nodding off, like right that moment when you're falling into deeper sleep. And I heard in my mind, clear as a bell, wake up and buy the domain name. Like it was a command. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a polite, you should do this. It was do this now. And I did. And then not a week later, the biggest piece that I didn't know how to do any of this tech stuff and get started and all of that, somebody in my circles at the time knew how to do all of that. And she helped me to start this podcast. She was my first editor and everything. And I'm really grateful that that happened, and to her. And then it just went from there, and it evolved. And it was very clunky at first, probably. Just my own skills speaking, and I don't know. It probably is still clunky now. And that's okay. But it's still here, and it's perhaps the first tangible example of me co-creating something with the divine, because this did not come from me. There's not one piece of this that I can say, oh, this was all me. This was my idea. I wanted to do this. I made it happen. It was in every level, in every way, co-created. And why am I bringing that up today? Well, it occurs to me that as I have gone forward in my own spiritual development and allowed more of the divine to come into my life in all aspects, I guess I mean the more I have allowed space for the divine to come in and rearrange my plans, my life, the more wondrous it has become. My life, that is. And the opportunities that have come along are unlike any I could have ever imagined. I literally could not 5 years ago imagine where I am now, definitely not 10 years ago. And I would not be where I am now if I had continued creating my life on my own for the things that I thought and my mind believed and wanted in the direction that I thought I was supposed to go. There was no, I'll say this. I feel that my experience and that perhaps all of our experiences in our lives are guided because we are eternal souls that came from the universe, divinity, and we plopped onto this planet, incarnated for this lifetime, sure. And so in some respect, in some level, we are guided throughout our whole lives. That's what I feel and know to be true. But are we conscious of it? Are we aware that that is happening? And when and if we become more aware that there is another force alongside us, guiding us, helping us, and there to guide and support more as we ask for it, as we need it, as we implore it, that becomes a situation where you can then intentionally, with awareness and consciously co-create your life with this divinity, with this divine force that is available to all of us. And if we don't recognize this, if we're not aware of it, as I wasn't for so very long, it seems, you might still be being nudged and guided, but you might miss what it's saying. You might miss the signs. You might miss the insights. You might miss whatever it is you're meant to be seeing and whatever direction you are to go. And it's not that it won't come back round. It will. It'll just get loud. It could just get louder and louder and louder like it did for me, and unavoidable, right? I'm sure many of you have had that experience where the divine is trying to tell you something. And first it's with the lightness, the gentleness of a feather, then it might be with the weight of a stone, and then it might be like a piano falling from the sky, right? So I guess that over time, with this very podcast, this very experience, being that first tangible co-creation, which has been followed by more, and I'm sure, and I hope, will be followed by even more as I continue throughout this incarnation, I guess it's just becoming more the whole thing, the whole lifetime, the whole experience is becoming more of a co-creation with the divine. And personally, I've rather enjoyed it. I've greatly enjoyed it. And so I just wanted to point out and talk about this aspect and maybe inspire people to look at their own lives and what are you co-creating with the divine? What are you allowing the divine to come in and help you with? Or not even help you, help to guide you, which direction would be most beneficial for you in some way, or guiding you to perhaps what your incarnational priorities are, like we talked about a few episodes ago. Maybe you're meant to co-create something beautiful, a building, a piece of art, a novel, a vacation, travel plans, any kind of plans, plans of all kinds, music, film, an organization, a system of some sort. It occurs to me that the things that we find inspiring, and I have to say, sometimes it's hard to find things these days that are inspiring. But the things that, if you think back, you visited a place and you've perhaps found a building inspiring, a piece of artwork inspiring, a piece of music inspiring, anything. Or for me, a lot of that is travel. And lately, as I've talked about at length, my travels have been co-created by the divine. Oftentimes, my team just coming in and saying, we need you to go here, we want you to go there, and being very specific about when and where to stay and what day to go, etc. And all of that is available to you if you want it to be. And what I mean by that is just getting more and more in touch with your own guidance, your own divinity, first of all, your own soul, and then the greater divinity around us, surrounding us all the time. And so that's available. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being inspired, inspiration literally means taking in spirit, inspiring, almost like breathing, inspiration, taking in spirit. So it's a whole nother way of saying co-creating with the divine, taking in source, taking in spirit, taking in God. And so when we see things that are inspiring to us, it's almost a confirmation, a validation that that thing, whatever it was co-created with the divine. Whoever built that, whoever authored that book, whoever painted that work of art or sculpted that sculpture or anything you found inspiring, it almost had to be co-created with the divine, because that's literally, it's the literal sense of the word. And so, what have you found inspiring? It might be a good exercise just to take a look at that. What has been inspiring to you throughout your life? What can you think of when I say that? Is it something that you saw while traveling? A film? Musicals? Musicals used to inspire me. That was one of the first things I can remember being inspired by, and that I just felt moved by. Not every single one, but certain ones. I happen to feel that most creative endeavors, the ones that make you feel something, the ones that make you feel moved, they almost have to be co-created with the divine. And you can tell, I wasn't planning on going into this, but I guess just to mention it, things can be co-created with darker forces as well. And you can usually feel that and sense that just because of how it makes you react and feel. And I don't even want to dwell on this, but I just wanted to put it out there. So much of our content is dark and violent. And I've seen art lately, walking around different art fairs and stuff in different countries, even, that you can tell the person who created the art is on drugs and being influenced by probably demons or some kind of darkness. And so, again, wasn't planning to mention that, but whatever. Different things can come in to co-create with you. So what would you like to allow in? And of course, humans can create things all on their own. I just have this suspicion, that's more than a suspicion, I guess, that the truly wondrous things, the truly magnificent, moving, inspiring, wonderful things on our planet were co-created with God, with the divine, with the higher power, whatever you want to call it, whatever words you want to use. But there was inspiration there. Humans create a lot too, but there's a different feeling. And I think that those of you listening here could probably really easily tell the difference between something that was created by humans without input or assistance or awareness of the divine, and things that were created and co-created with the divine. Whether or not the human creator was aware of it, I think it is a wonderful thing, and I don't know how rare it is actually to be aware that you're co-creating with the divine when you're making something. I hope it's more common than I assume that it is. I hope that these humans throughout history who have created amazing things, beautiful things, inspiring things, and I'm not just talking about art and music, I'm also talking about systems that worked, and even technology, tools, machinery, gardening techniques, things that advanced us as a society. Where did these ideas come from? Where did these knowings come from? But then we also look around. Nobody would look at our modern day skyscrapers and think that they were co-created by the divine, right? There's no beauty, there's no inspiration in so many of them. I'm not trying to knock these architects or anything. It's just that, go to Europe or go to Asia and see these temples that were clearly created through some form of inspiration, some form of divinity. There's a difference. There's a feeling. There's a movement there's a vibration. And some things, more than others. So, what are you going to co-create? What have you already co-created? I am in a place where it's almost harder. It's almost harder to come up with things on my own now. It's more clunky. It's more sticky. I have to think more. I don't want to think anymore. I just want to know. I just want to get the downloads and the guidance. Some people don't like the word download. That's fine. The inspiration to do something. I can't force myself to write or paint or write music or even sit down and record a podcast episode. I mostly need to have the inspiration to do it. And I don't always know what I'm going to talk about. But oftentimes, the main idea drops in. And then I just center myself and go with it and see what comes out. And again, I'm not trying to claim that anything about this podcast is particularly inspiring, but I know that some people get something out of it. And my intention, as you can tell from my prayer requests in the beginning, is that each episode reaches whoever needs to hear it. I don't presume that there's a large number of folks running around in the world who need to hear this particular episode, but there probably are a handful who need to hear it for some reason. And I believe they will. And hopefully it helps them to do something or gives them some form of insight that they needed to do the next thing or get to the next level or whatever. I think that's how it works for all of us. These little things, these little waysides, these little signals, these little fairy lights leading us to the next thing that we needed to know and we needed to hear, or we needed to see, we needed to experience to move forward to the next level, whatever that may be. So if you are listening to this, I hope that you already have, perhaps you already have co-created a multitude of greatness with the divine. I hope you have. And if you're still working that out, feel free to make requests. Ask them to turn up the volume. Make it more obvious, more apparent what you're supposed to do. And thank you, as always, for being part of this. I had no idea I'd still be going now. I don't know how long this will last. I have no idea. I just listen. And you can listen too and see what you're supposed to do for your incarnation. I will be doing a bonus content clearing and will work on removing any obstacles to co-creating with the divine. And you can find that bonus content at patreon.com/letsgetmeta. And I will leave it there for today. And for however long or short you've been listening, maybe this is your 100th episode, maybe this is your first episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. And if you don't, I hope that you find the next perfect thing for you that you needed to hear or know or see to get you to the next step of whatever you need to do for your best and highest good in this incarnation. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. If you are ready to raise your vibration, you might enjoy our free Let's Get Meta Master Clearing. To receive the Master Clearing or to learn more about the podcast, visit letsgetmeta.com. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be a patron angel to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.